Hello and welcome to another episode of Paranormal People. My name's Alex and I'm your host. Tonight we have a guest with a lifetime of paranormal experiences and a deep connection to the unexplained. Kaz has always believed in spirits and is highly sensitive to them. Just like her daughter Hannah, living in Derby with her Texan-British husband Freddie, Kaz has spent years encountering the paranormal, from ghostly apparitions to intense physical experiences, including once being pushed up against a wall by an unseen force. For over 20 years, she lived in a haunted house, witnessing incredible activity that would terrify most, but for Kaz, fear is replaced by fascination. Even her old dog continued to visit after passing, his presence still heard throughout the home. And if that wasn't enough, she's also had a vivid time slip experience that has stayed with her for decades. Her husband may not believe in ghosts, but Kaz has seen too much to doubt the reality of the supernatural. Tonight, she's here to share her stories, so get ready for some truly eerie encounters. Welcome to the show, Kaz.
Hi, it's lovely to talk to you, Alex.
So, where does this all begin?
As a child, I had experiences of seeing my auntie, who I hadn't realised had passed away. And when I saw her, obviously she'd smiled and waved at me, sort of thing, and I smiled and waved back. And it wasn't until a few days later that I found out that she'd passed away. And obviously my parents hadn't told me straight away, sort of thing, so. But yeah, I've had so many strange things. The main thing that I was on to you about tonight was when we moved into our new home back in 1993. Hannah was 6 months old. I moved into this beautiful old house, 1900s, 1910 it had been built. Of course, being in Derby, we're never too far away from Rolls-Royce. And our house was like 6 doors away from a main Rolls-Royce building in Derby. And as soon as I moved in, it was really quiet to start with. Nothing really happened much until one night I put Hannah to bed. You don't have the old-fashioned baby monitors that you have to plug into the wall and turn them on. And,
they creep me out.
Yeah. I'd plugged them both in, sat downstairs watching telly, a knock at the door. So I go to the door, nobody there. Thought, probably kids messing about, So I come back in and sat down and it was all very quiet. I couldn't hear Hannah over the speaker, over the monitor. So I went to check and the monitor was unplugged from the wall, which was very difficult to do because it was behind the back of the TV. So I have no idea how that happened. It freaked me out slightly, to say the least. But I went to check and Hannah was fine, fast asleep, And we started doing renovations to the place. We had a really big pantry in the kitchen that needed to go because it filled the whole kitchen sort of thing. And when we started knocking that down, that is when we started hearing running up and down the stairs. We would hear walking along the landing and bangs. And that's when I thought something's not quite right here. I decided to have a look into the history of the house. And I found out that during the war, there's a little boy. We're not too sure if he lived in the house or if he was brought to the house after the accident, but he was waiting for his dad to finish work at the gates of Rolls-Royce, and a bomb had dropped, sadly killing the little boy. We're not too sure if it was outright, but he died in the house. This was World War II sometime. I'm not too sure exactly when it was. So it went from there, really. I started asking out if this was right. Is the little boy apparently was called Edward? So I would ask out, Edward, is that you? Is this true, sort of thing? And I get knocks and bumps. We would walk up the stairs and you go up so far upstairs and it's really weird because the atmosphere changed. As you went up the stairs, you got so high and then the atmosphere was really thick. And then you went past the step and it was fine. So we actually came up with the idea that probably Edward was sat on the stairs.
That thick atmosphere, was that more a feeling of presence than a feeling of maybe fear or, something wanting to harm you? It was just a case you felt something else was there?
Yes, yeah. It was quite an oppressive type feeling as you got so far up. You could tell it's a completely different feeling. It was actually quite weird. Most people could feel it my parents, they could feel it as they walked up and down the stairs. They knew it. And gradually, Edward would make himself more and more known. My daughter saw him a couple of times. I didn't see him until many years later, but we'd have knocks and we'd have bangs. He would play with the dog that we had then. We'd hear him laughing. We would walk upstairs and our bathroom was at the bottom of the very long landing. And we would look down the landing and under the door, you could see feet moving. And there's no way that anybody could have been there. It couldn't have been a shadow because there was nothing. There was no trees, nothing like that. There was just other houses behind us. So there's no way that anybody could have been there. Our next door neighbour had a brother who was a complete and total skeptic. He thought that we was making it all up, that we were mad, we were trying to get attention sort of thing, you know. And I said to him, come and stand on the stairs and see what happens to you. And he did. He stood on the stairs and he was... come on then, Edward, if it's you, come on, you're not real, you know, sort of thing. And the next thing I know is he is racing down the stairs, runs out the house, shouting, I am never coming back in this place again. Apparently he felt 2 hands on his back.
Oh, wow.
Pushing him down the stairs. Which I said, well done, Edward. Thank you. I mean, this never scared me. Edward never, ever scared me. I think it was like I was a mother figure, you know?
Yeah.
And Hannah was obviously like a sister figure to him, you know? He never scared any of us. He was cheeky. He would hide things. He would throw things, you know? The only time I ever saw him was after this incident had happened. After the man had run out the house, I went upstairs and I looked into my bedroom, and I had a mirror. Just as you go in the bedroom, I had a big mirror. And the only time I saw him was a reflection in this mirror. This scruffy little boy. He was really thin looking. And he turned around in the mirror with the most wickedest of smiles you have ever, ever seen. And that is the only time I ever saw him. And he stayed with us all that time. You know, he did quieten down after a while. Things started to get quiet. We had, as I said, that was about it with him, but we had a little dog. We had a big dog. My daughter was terrified of dogs, so I got a dog. Benji was his name. They were best friends. Instantly, he took away her fear of dogs.
What breed was Benji?
He was a rescue dog, Labrador Staffy Cross.
Oh, lovely.
He was gorgeous. He'd had a bad time, bless him. He'd got broken ribs and all sorts and that, you know. So we took him in. Hannah and Benji became best friends. They would go everywhere together. He was so protective of her. You couldn't play fight with her because he'd think you were hurting her sort of thing, you know. So we had him for 10 wonderful years when sadly he developed diabetes.
Oh.
And then that led to stomach cancer. And we very, very sadly lost him to that, which was horrendous. At the time, we had a wrought iron bed in the bedroom, and Benji would always jump up on the bed and you'd hear the bed. But after Benji died, we got rid of the bed. I couldn't bear to have that bed because of, you know, Benji being in it and that sort of thing. So we got rid of the bed. We got a divan bed. Not too long after we got the divan bed, we started to hear a wrought iron bed being jumped off and paws running down the stairs, running across the laminated floor in the kitchen. We would hear this constantly. It was the most wonderful, wonderful feeling to know that Benji had come back. I mean, there was no wrought iron bed anymore, so I don't know how we could have heard the wrought iron bed being jumped off and jumped onto. It's the most wonderful, wonderful feeling to know he was there with us. I actually left the house when I got married in 2013. I gifted the house to Hannah as my wedding present to her sort of thing.
Yeah.
And she stayed in that house until 2019 when she moved on and got a new house. She stood on the bottom of the stairs when she was about to leave, and she was like, Benji, I'm going now, but I want you to come with me. You know, she says, come on, Benji, come with me. I want you to be at my house. We didn't think much of it, you know. But a month or so after she had left and moved into her new house, I got a very excited text one morning saying, Benji's back, he's here. And I rang her and I spoke to her. What do you mean Benji's back? She says, I've walked in the kitchen this morning, Mum, and there's a biggest paw print on the floor in the kitchen in water, in a puddle of water. It's the biggest paw print you've ever seen. Said it's Ben. Ben's come back. And that was it. He'd followed her. He'd followed her to a new house, yeah, because they were inseparable in life. They're inseparable.
There's often that question of whether malevolent or not, can spirits follow us from one place to another? Is it the house that's haunted? Is it the person? And I think that's something that's still very much up for debate, but that is really interesting that Benji could die in one place and still kind of follow to another after such a long time. And it does bring you that peace, which is very, very nice. And is that something that's still kind of going on today? Can his presence still be felt?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, she still feels him. Yeah. The house where she is now, it's got the most beautiful atmosphere. And I think that is purely because Benny's followed her. You know, she can sense him still. She doesn't hear him as much, but she knows he's there. She's had a few little paw prints walking about, but they have got a cat now, you know, so they can't always say it's Ben sort of thing, you know, because they have got a cat. But no, they do still hear bigger paw prints. She does still feel him jump on the bed. The cat isn't allowed upstairs, so she knows for a fact it's not the cat. She can still feel him jump up on the bed with her, and it's just a really lovely feeling.
Yeah, no, it really is.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You mentioned that yourself and your daughter Hannah are both sensitive to spirits, and of course you've both had some encounters with the spirit world. Do you think that's something that potentially runs in your family? Is that something that you're aware of going back before yourself in the family, or do you have other family members that have that sensitivity?
My dad is a lot stronger than Hannah and I. He can see and talk to spirit. His grandmother could do it as well. You know, she would sense spirit and that and be able to see spirit. So it does go back into the family. Unfortunately, it is on my dad's side because my mum can't sense anything and it really winds her up because she wants to feel stuff and she can't.
Yeah, fear of missing out on something. Yeah. It is something unique, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
And I guess to some degree, I think everybody has some element of sensitivity. I do, of course, there's some people more sensitive than others, which is why you get people in psychic mediumship, for example. Mm-hmm. And it's something myself and my sister experienced in a house we lived in a Victorian place. You know, even today, everything that happened, absolutely we saw. But then that kind of fizzled out and we haven't sort of had anything since. Do you think these hauntings, although spirits might be able to move from one place to another, do you think there's also an element that there are certain kind of hot spots for spirits? You know, maybe that house was a hot spot and that's why you had more of a sensitivity, or do you think it is more just the person?
I think it could well have been a hot spot, to be honest with you, because that whole street was bombed during the war. So I think it was a hot spot really for the amount of people that died on that road.
Yeah.
I think there has to be something there where you can still sense their spirit and their turmoil that they went through.
We talk on this particular show, and I know some other paranormal shows as well, we'll talk a lot about time slips. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that the story about the little boy you saw who potentially died in the war, and he was running up and down the stairs and being all cheeky. And in your opinion, would you say that he knew he was dead, or do you think he was maybe caught in some sort of time slip where perhaps he saw the house and the area as it was back when he died? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think he knew he was dead. I think he was caught up in some sort of a recording of his last few days or something like that, you know, before the accident, because it was the same motions, we heard the same things all the time. You know, we heard him up and down the stairs and we'd hear the same noises. So we think he's probably in some sort of a recording going over the same few things that happened to him sort of thing before the accident. That's what I think. I mean, I have had another time slip experience when I was a teenager that's still with me to this day. And I swear to goodness, I saw what I saw and I heard what I heard. You know, that was a terrifying experience. But with Edward, I think he was just going home from school sort of things, you know, up and down the stairs, going to bed and that, you know, that's what I thought he was doing myself.
It is an interesting one, isn't it? I suppose we'll never truly know until we pass, but it always fascinates me. Are they kind of living in their time period and slipping into ours? Are they dead, I suppose, and they're haunting us as a ghost? Do they know they're dead? And it's something that it's good to get people's thoughts on that, I feel, and everyone seems to have a different opinion on it. So yeah, it's really interesting. So going into your time slip experience, I'm really interested to hear about that. What happened?
This was back in the early 80s. I think I was about 16, 17. Lovely hot summer's day, red hot. I'd been to a teenage disco type thing in town. And it got really hot and stuffy, so I decided to come out and get some fresh air. I don't know if you know Derby at all, but they've got the River Derwent runs right through the centre of Derby.
Yeah, I'm actually from Nottingham, so I guess we're rivals.
So anyway, yeah, I walked along the River Gardens, and you know where the Silk Mill is in Derby?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, on the riverbank. We'd walked to there and we just stood look at the river. And all of a sudden, it wasn't a sunny day anymore. It was cold. It was foggy. The river was running really fast and it wasn't doing a few moments earlier. And I heard screaming and I looked out into the river and there was 2 boys in the river, obviously being dragged away by the current. And I was shouting to my friend, get the boys. We've got to get the boys. Come on, help them. And I was trying to get over the fence, the railings to try and get hold of them, to try and drag them back. And I'm being shouted at, what you on about? What you talking about? But I'm in my element with these 2 boys. And I was really dead certain I was going to try and get them, But all of a sudden, my friend pulled me back. It really yanked me back. And it wasn't cold anymore. It wasn't misty anymore. It was a red hot summer's day. And my friend was absolutely freaking out with me, So what do you think you're trying to do? You're trying to kill yourself? Because I can't swim. But I was trying to get these lads. She didn't see a thing. To her, it was a hot day and I was screaming and shouting that there were 2 boys in the river that she couldn't see, which really upset us both, to be honest with you. And that has lived with ever since. But what really brought it all back to me was a while afterwards, I was actually, this is really, really weird and freaky. I was in the hairdressers, believe it or not. And I was talking to the hairdresser and something came up about hauntings and ghosts and that sort of thing. And I told her my experience that I'd seen these 2 boys in the river and what had happened. And she went as white as a sheet. And I'm like, what? I thought I'd upset her, and she told me that in the 50s, when they was at school, they'd been to the mill at Darley Abbey. They'd been there round by the weir, and 2 boys had fell in the river and been dragged all the way down to the weir near the council house in Derby, and their bodies were dragged out of the weir there. We were both shocked, to say the least.
Of course.
It was massive, massive shock to think that I'd seen what had happened. It was, I can still see it to this day. I can still see the boys. I can still hear them screaming. It's really stuck with me all this time. Yeah. So the incident actually happened. She was there when the boys fell in the river and when the bodies were dragged out further down. She was there. They were her school friends. So the incident actually happened. That is why she was so white as a sheet. Yeah.
Terrifying, but it is amazing. I suppose typically with these time slips, often you hear about, there's a few famous cases of time slips where they go back quite a while. I think there was the Mobley Jourdain incident in 1901. You had 2 women who claimed to have walked into 18th century Versailles and they saw historical figures from, I think, Marie Antoinette's period and they snapped back to the present. And more locally, you had, there were some Liverpool time slips where multiple people had reported stepping into old versions of Liverpool and seeing streets and buildings that didn't exist. And, often they're quite long. It's quite long periods of time that they're slipping back into, going way into the past. Whereas this is, I guess, a bit more recent, which is interesting. I guess it just shows that you can essentially slip into any time period. And have you done any further, I suppose, research following that experience as to what maybe causes it? Or have you learned anything more about these slips?
I haven't. No, I know I did look into it, the 2 boys. I did find an article going back into the 50s in one of the libraries about it. It did actually happen, but I haven't looked into it any further than that. I think it shook me too much.
Of course.
to think, oh my gosh, I've actually seen that.
And is that the only one that's ever happened to you, or has it ever happened again?
I think that's the only one. Yeah.
Just a very random occasion on that.
Yeah.
How strange. And it would be interesting to know if there's any reason for it. Is there a reason that you're experiencing what you experienced during those slips? Is there a reason you've gone back to view it? And another one that it does raise some very big questions, really.
Yes, it does. Yeah, definitely. So I was just so shocked to actually experience it. I think I'm still speechless now. You can tell I'm still speechless trying to think about it now. It's very vivid to me still.
And can you remember what the boys were kind of dressed in? Was there anything that really, aside from the obvious change in weather, were there any other characteristics there that made you realise, okay, I'm not in the present right now?
It was the school uniforms. There was in old school uniforms. But at that point, I hadn't seen that uniform before. We never wore uniforms when we were at school, and they were really old-fashioned looking. The hairstyle, obviously, but the hair was wet through sort of thing, but they just looked out of place. Do you get me?
Yeah. They're not supposed to be there. Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't last that long. I just remember the grey school uniforms and the hair, but the actual thing was that they shouldn't have been there. They didn't look in the right place at the right time. Do you know what I mean? It looked they were out of sequence sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? Out of their time zone, and because going from a hot summer's day to a really cold, I don't know, autumn day, I don't know what it was in that instant, was very, very shocking. Very,
very, very different. And going back to the haunted house where you experienced the young boy and your dog, and then coming back to this sort of time slip, it's interesting to me that you don't seem overly, although you seem shocked and almost in awe of what you've experienced, you seem more fascinated. Is that the case? And why would you say the paranormal doesn't frighten you?
I'm just more fascinated by the stories and the experiences. They can't hurt you. These spirits, I don't believe they can hurt. Well, apart from that one, that put me up the wall.
We'll hear about that shortly.
Yeah. And they don't scare me. I'm fascinated with them. I'm just so interested in how hauntings happen and how you experience hauntings and how different people see the haunting sort of thing, and what they hear and what they see. I'm just fascinated by it. Even that one where I got put up the wall, I wasn't scared. I've never been scared by a haunting yet. Saying that now. No, I've never been scared.
Is that just because it's so overwhelming in the moment that you kind of, I suppose, almost don't have time to be scared? Or are you just comfortable in the fact that there is almost this barrier between the living and the dead that they can't surpass?
I'm just so comfortable with the fact that there are spirit around us. It's a comforting feeling to know that there's other people there, probably family members that you can't always sense and see, that are always going to be around you. I just find it a really comforting, loving feeling to know that they could be there.
Of course.
It's a wonderful feeling.
And moving to the experience where you were put up against a wall, it sounds like this was a spirit or an energy maybe that felt completely different from the others, maybe something a bit darker or more powerful. Is that accurate?
Yes, it was very, very dark. I think it was an energy more than an actual person sort of thing, My daughter and I, before I was disabled, my daughter and I would go on ghost vigils because we both really love this sort of thing. So we went to a ghost vigil at Castle Gresley, a place called the Old Hall. I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
I don't think I have, but it's one I'll definitely look it up.
Yeah, it's the Old Hall. It's either Castle Gresley or Church Gresley, one of the two. We went there, my daughter and I, because we'd been told it was a very active building. So we went there with a group of people from a ghost hunting team. I don't like the word ghost hunting. I don't like hunting ghosts. It's not the right word.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been around that building, and previously we'd had a wonderful moment where my daughter's twin had got in touch. No one there knew that Hannah had lost a twin. And one of the mediums that was there picked up on it, telling Hannah that there's a girl with you, but it's not you, sort of thing, And that really, it shook Hannah, not in a scary way, in a way that she always knew that her sister was there with her. Her twin sister was there with her. She always knew that. It was the first time that she'd had clarification that she was there, that it wasn't just Hannah wishing her sister was there with her. It was actual clarification that, yes, she's there with you. So that had been a quite overwhelming experience to start with. But as the evening went on, things started to get a bit darker. As we moved further up the building, the energies completely changed from being nice energies, gentle energies, to becoming quite dark. And we were sat around the table in one room in complete darkness. And all of a sudden, my hand was thrust. I was holding hands with somebody else. Both our hands were thrust over the table, and literally the poor girl opposite just about had her hair pulled out. It was complete darkness, and we just couldn't stop this energy from moving us. So the lady that I was holding hands with, we were both so shocked we couldn't move our hands. No matter how hard we tried, we could not release our hands and let go. It wouldn't let us do it. So I got quite angry at that point. You don't have permission to do that sort of thing. I do not give you permission to do that. And we'd got into another room. We were all stood around the outside of the room against the walls, holding hands again. I was still quite angry at this point of what had happened, you know.
I think you're stronger than I am, Kaz, because I think myself and many people listening would probably be terrified. And you're almost wanting to tell it off.
Yeah, I did. I was angry. It was like, how dare you? You know, I wasn't scared, even though, some people would be terrified. I was just angry.
Well, I suppose it's no different, I guess, to a human being pushing you against a wall or doing something that they shouldn't be doing. You want to bat them off and say, hang on, what are you doing here? And I guess it's no different in that respect.
No. And we were all around the outside of this room, holding hands. And I'd been angry at it, saying, look, I don't give you permission to touch any of us. You don't have permission. You know, leave people alone. And all of a sudden, my hand went up the wall. I'm 4'9". Yeah. My hand went up the wall and I was literally on tiptoe. It had dragged me right up the wall. I was holding hands with the other person but our hands were dragged up the wall. I was on tiptoe and I was in absolute agony, shouting at it to put me down. And my daughter shouts out, put my mother down now. And that was it. I dropped to the floor, literally just dropped to the floor in a big heap in agony. And I just looked at Hannah and I said, put your mother down gently.
That sounds terrifying.
People thought it was. After that, someone was punched.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they were scared. They ran out.
I can imagine. And was there any indication following this or at the time, was this maybe a poltergeist, or what do you think this was? Just a dark energy? Is there anything kind of telltale signs as to what you were dealing with?
Well, when we were there, we was told about one of the old farmhands that used to be there was quite a nasty, misogynistic, evil man who didn't like women at all. He put me on there straight away, not to be scared of him, but to stand up to it, sort of thing. So that put me on edge. It was the atmosphere changed. You go into a room and it's like someone's had an argument, and
Yes, the energy completely shifts.
Yeah, it become like that. But it was almost like there'd been a fight in this room. And they just walked out and we just walked into it, sort of thing. The atmosphere was intense as you got further up the stairs. It was very intense and it changed. It became very dark very quickly. So,
are you able to describe the actual building itself and the room that it happened in? What did it look like?
The building itself, part of it is almost derelict. There's no one living there. It's a really old looking farmhouse type thing. But attached to it is this really horrible carbuncle of a community centre that's literally just stuck on the side of it like an old council building, Mm-hmm. Sorry, really horrible looking.
Yeah.
Modern thing that doesn't go with the building whatsoever. It's in the middle of a park. There's houses all around it, but it's in the middle of this lovely big parkland area. And it's just this building on its own. It looks dark. And you look at it, it looks like a haunted house. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Stereotypical haunted building.
Yeah, very dark looking house, windows broken sort of thing. It was virtually derelict when we went. I believe now there are certain areas that you cannot go into because it is too bad now. I went back, I think I went back something like 22, I think it was, I went back. With my daughter and my cousin, and it was a completely different feeling. There was nothing there at all. There was no bangings, no knockings, no dark energy, nothing like that at all the last time we went. So yeah, whether or not something's moved on or someone has moved it on, I don't know, but it was very quiet. It wasn't the same building that I'd experienced years earlier with my daughter.
And do you feel like the vigil that was being conducted might have brought it out or angered it in some way?
I think so, yes, because there's a lot of women in the group.
Right, okay.
There was a couple of men, probably about 3, probably, and most of them were actually in the actual group that was arranging it all. There weren't that many men there. It was mainly women. Whether or not that would have been a different matter. The last time we went, it was more of a mixture of men and women. It was more of an equal amount sort of thing. So whether that had any bearing in it or not, I don't know, but the atmosphere was completely different.
That is really interesting. I suppose it almost sounds like maybe a mixture of things, that vigil that was being conducted, maybe it brought whatever this being was, poltergeist or dark energy, out into the building, or maybe the vigil and the presence of women. I mean, did anything happen to any of the men?
No.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all. They were perfectly fine. Nothing bothered them at all.
Directly correlates with the description you gave of the man who was there, the farmer.
Yeah, definitely. He must have been evil in his lifetime.
Yeah, I can imagine from his actions in the afterlife. That sounds quite traumatic, really. But you've certainly dealt with it better than I think most people would. And
I just think I was so fascinated to experience it.
It's not an everyday thing, is it? And I think a lot of people don't experience anything paranormal in the whole lifetime, and this is where skeptics boil from. Even some of the experiences I've had growing up, there's been numerous, and still part of your brain sometimes goes back and tries to rationalize everything. But I guess being pushed up against a wall and lifted off the floor isn't something you can really rationalize, especially when you've got multiple people there. So I think these are the stories that really kind of ground it into reality, that, we've had multiple witnesses, something physical has happened, something that you can remember like it happened yesterday. And,
definitely.
They're stories that I think stick with people. And is it something that still almost haunts you today? Do you still think about it, or do you try to push it out of your mind?
I still think about it. We talk about it quite a bit, my daughter and I. We laugh about it now. The thought of someone lifting me up, it's like, I'm only 4'9". People who don't believe me, it's like, I can't lift myself up off the floor like that. From one thing, I use crutches. I didn't have my crutches with me when I was doing that, so I haven't got the strength to lift myself up like that. But now, Hannah and I, we do laugh about it now. People don't believe us sometimes, but that's fine. Let them.
I always say on here, there's always going to be skeptics and disbelievers, or people who want to try to disprove things. And typically, I think a lot of it stems from a fear of the unknown. Some of it is just they want to be ignorant or blissfully ignorant of it. Other people just have no life and want to go out their way to dampen other people's experiences. But shows like this, 99.999% of people listening will believe it, and are listening because they believe there is something out there, or they want to believe there's something out there. So I think there'll be plenty of people in your camp that will very much believe what you've said. And the way you are telling these stories does not come across as somebody who is lying or would fabricate these things. This is very much, I think you can always tell when somebody's recounting a memory as opposed to a rehearsed story. And something I find fascinating about doing these episodes, every single person sounds 100% genuine, like it happened yesterday. And it only further solidifies my belief that there's something else. So I think it's fascinating. You mentioned that your husband is a bit of a skeptic, is that right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Very, very skeptic. As a stubborn Texan.
But something that interested me today is you said that he had been seeing the spirit of your cat. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, he does Misty. Yeah. My husband is recovering from brain cancer. And we got Misty not long after he was diagnosed with the brain cancer. So she was his rock sort of thing. She kept him going. She was like what he lived for day by day sort of thing. And sadly, we lost her after having her for only 6 months.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Oh yeah, she was gorgeous. Lovely silver grey cat. She was beautiful. We lost her. She had an embolism in her back and her spine. And we lost her very, very quickly. But not long after, I would see her. I could feel her walking on the bed. You get a cat jump on the bed and walk up and they'll pad the bed in and all that, I would feel that a lot. But I didn't say anything to Freddie about it. I kept it quiet. And then he would say to me, I can feel padding on my back at night. I said, that's Misty. He's like, no, it's not. She doesn't think ghosts don't exist. They don't. I'm like, okay. And then he told me that he started seeing her because we do, actually. I'm not joking. Almost a daily basis. Yes, we have a cat. Rich is a totally different cat to Misty. We will literally on a daily basis, we will see a grey cat in our peripheral vision walking around. We will feel her at night time. Our cat now, Harley, she isn't around when this happens. We always check. But if I say to Freddie, you believe in ghosts? He's like, no, I don't. I'm like, but you see Misty. He's like, yes, but that's different. That's my Misty. I'm like, how can it be different? She's a spirit. You're seeing her. Yeah, but it's different. She's not a ghost. That's my Misty. It's
definitely an interesting outlook, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, she's not a ghost. She's his Misty. So
Oh, it's a really lovely story. I think, I love to hear about animals that have come back and visit loved ones. And it's not something you really hear that often.
Mhm.
You more often hear about the malevolent spirits or human spirits. And as fascinating as they are, it gives you that comfort, I suppose, that even our loved animals can come back as well. So thank you for sharing that. And to anyone that's listening at the minute that might be experiencing any kind of haunting, be it the type that does pin you against a wall or the type that runs up and down your stairs and shines a cheeky grin in the mirror, would you have any advice to somebody dealing with it and how to cope?
I would just say talk to them, acknowledge that they're there, that you tell them you can see them and you believing them, and try and get them to try in some way tell their story to you. Please don't be scared of them. Apart from the ones that chuck you up the wall, don't be scared of your everyday beautiful spirits that come to visit you. Don't be scared. Say hello, acknowledge them.
I think that's really, really good advice. And do you know what? I'd probably say very similar. I think sometimes you need to be open to what is around you. Try not to ignore it. And I think you often hear about spirits almost getting annoyed or angry because they're being ignored. They aren't being acknowledged. And I suppose it's impossible for us to know because we haven't been to that world. But it must get quite lonely, I'd imagine, especially if you're haunting a particular location and you're not sure why. If you're not sure even that you are dead, I imagine these places can be lonely. If there's maybe a limbo where you're waiting for the next thing, I think it is solid advice to communicate. And as you said, try not to be afraid. I think there is definitely that sort of barrier. And although I guess sometimes it can slip through and physicality can happen, which is obviously not what anybody wants, you are safe. And I think the majority of people do come out safe from these things.
And don't forget, they could be scared of you, so.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And they could maybe think that it could be the opposite, couldn't they? They could think we're dead. Yeah. But no, they're very, very fascinating stories there. And I think you've dealt with them in an admirable way. And maybe one day your husband will believe. So let's hold on to that hope.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for joining the show.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was lovely talking to you.
What a great episode. And thank you for listening. If you would like to have a chance at appearing on a future episode, and you've got a scary story to tell, whether it's UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, or something else you can't explain, please get in touch at info@angryfoxmedia.com. Again, that's info@angryfoxmedia.com. Stay safe out there.